Hello, and welcome to Asia Center's Big Ideas, the podcast series about civil society in contemporary Asia. I'm your host, Kelvin Param. In 2025, Donald Trump's return to office triggered what leaders in the development sector described as a tectonic shift for CSOs and NGOs globally. The reduction of nearly $60 billion in U.S. foreign aid, along with the dismantling of USAID, has hit civic space particularly hard. Additionally, the global gag rule has been expanded to include bans on DEI initiatives and what the administration labels gender ideology, leading to the withdrawal of funding from women's health and education programs in South Asia. At the same time, cross-border aid for Myanmar refugees has effectively collapsed. While China has stepped in to provide stopgap funding to keep some infrastructure projects moving, Beijing remains notably reluctant to support social development areas such as human rights and education, leaving a significant vacuum in the region's civil society. So, how has this massive funding contraction reshaped civil society organizations in Asia? Beyond the rhetoric of localization, can regional initiatives like the Kathmandu Covenant genuinely provide the cultural agility and financial independence needed to replace older Western centric models? As funding grows more competitive and gravitates towards large institutions, how can smaller organizations, particularly in the social sector, sustain their mission in a resource constrained landscape? Joining me today to examine these complex challenges is Dr. James Gomez, a political scientist and the regional director and founder of Asia Center. James, welcome to the program.
Hi, Kelvin. Great to be here and looking forward to chatting with you.
Before we discuss the impact on civil society, it's important to understand America's policy shift, one that triggered this seismic disruption in the development sector. James, would you briefly describe the changes to international funding and development assistance that the Trump administration introduced in 2025? And why have these decisions had such far reaching consequences for NGOs operating across Asia?
Kelvin, today marks a week after 1 year when the Trump's directive put a pause on all funding from the U.S. For 90 days. And that happened on 20th January 2025. There was a sense of shock and awe. Mostly you could feel it through LinkedIn because that's where all the development sector people were mostly operating from. And there was concern. At Asia Center, we had a couple of approved projects that we were waiting to kick off and sign final contracts, which usually happens at the start of the year. And these were, unclear. Just like for us and for everybody else, in the month of January 2025, there was a lot of apprehension. Many were hopeful the 90 days would just be a stock-taking measure in terms of, perhaps some slight calibration, and that the funding pause would be released and things will return back to normal. But it didn't. After 90 days, it went on to the dismantling of the USAID structure in July 2025. So within a space of 5 months, the funding and the support structure was gone. At the back of it, I think we need to go beyond Trump and the U.S. You also had ripple effects across Europe and other Western nations who also prioritized, immediate foreign policy needs and also lessened and withdrew funding from the development sector. So the impact really was one of shock and freeze. So in the first 90 days, a lot of the work was just going through stop orders And we were waiting, and after 90 days, it was slowly clear that the money was not coming back. And the coup de grace was delivered in July when USAID was dismantled. So the funding was gone. Now, for Asia Center, this amounted only to about 10 to 12% of all the funding that we were operating on. So we weren't affected so much. But many NGOs, for example, let's say in Cambodia, which I know quite well, who are depending up to 90, even 100% U.S. funding, they were severely affected, and 1 year on, I think many have not quite recovered.
So, how have CSOs, especially organizations working on democracy and human rights issues across Asia, tried to cope with this upheaval?
I think we will have to look at it two parts. First, we will have to look at the international NGOs and then the local CSOs. For the international NGOs, they froze salaries of local and international staff, waiting for some clarity after 90 days. Then when it was clear that USAID was dismantled and all funding was stopped, the step that followed after was to lay off staff and then slowly shut down offices. Now, the shutting down of offices was quite rapid. Within 6 months, many have, left the region, and it's 1 year on, most have left the region. And here, when I mean region, is Asia, and with specific focus on those institutions that work on democracy and human rights. Now, for the local CSOs, they have always been here, whether they had funding or not. And therefore, you will see, while some CSOs did, sort of pause their operation, most, still are adopting a wait-and-see approach. They are in a period of what I call hibernation. So they either pause their operation to wait and see, or they operate in a very, very sort of low output measure. They use the term, okay, we are operating in a period of funding gap. But I think the difference between the INGOs and the local CSOs are that those who work in INGOs see themselves as development professionals, but the local CSOs, those who work in local CSOs, don't see themselves as such. They largely see themselves as volunteers or passionate workers. They do more for less. Surprisingly, local CSOs still remain. Even if it's an outfit of 3, 5, or 7 people and half or no more, you will still see the core people, including the founders, very much engaged with the very few dollars they may have. So a lot of these local CSOs continue to operate on a volunteer basis.
This is obviously a massive change to the structure of the labor market in this NGO CSO sector. If we are looking at a future where pretty much the NGOs kind of recede and the CSOs remain, how does that shape the sustainability of trained, experienced personnel operating as CSOs? Can they function as before with much more limited funding? Will they retain people that already have been working on more modest budgets in the past and going into, pretty much austere budgets now? How is that going to change CSOs in the region in terms of their labor force?
Yeah, again, I think we need to make a distinction between INGOs and CSOs. It is the INGOs that are most severely affected. They position themselves as, development professionals drawing a professional salary. 6 months following the funding cut and the collapse of USAID, what you see in LinkedIn most, and that's where the most play is people being open for work, people sharing job opportunities and adverts, consultancy roles, and so on and so forth. That's what you see. But now that we have gone 1 year, I don't think there are many roles for such, development professionals. I think most of the roles are very much in the hands of local NGOs and national levels. So there is work, but they are modestly paid. We do see, in Asia, some of the development professionals, moving to the region. We know from our experience, quite a few of them are parked in Chiang Mai, for example. Time to time, we at Asia Center do receive emails from our friends who are out of work now, asking whether there were jobs or even consultancies that they can be part of. But the challenge always is that the quantum that the CSOs, local CSOs, have is very much pegged at the local rate. So when we offer these rates to our international friends, they often decline, saying that it doesn't match their expectations and expertise. So I think that's the nub there. So moving forward, I think the labor market in this sector will be reshaped. I think at very modest rates, but also recruiting people who are more motivated by passion rather than anything else, because they do really work for very modest rates in the region.
That's a really nice segue to get into talking about the nitty gritty of funding. Let's start with a sort of a bigger picture and then drill down to what Asia Center does, its strategy around funding. So in late 2025, the creation of the ASHA, or the AASHA Fund, and the signing of the Kathmandu Covenant was seen as a potential turning point for regional civil society by some. Before we dive into the implications, firstly, James, what are these initiatives and what are their respective purposes?
The ASA Fund is primarily, to try to bring together or give local agency to CSOs from the region in the humanitarian sector. The key message there is they want to donors to recognize the agency of local CSOs. So they create this fund idea, asking donors to plunk in the money so that the local CSOs have more agency to do that. But I think the problem is it's still framed around the donor mentality. It's still asking for money from elsewhere when there isn't much money elsewhere, or the elsewhere is not in a position to fund activities in the region anymore. So for me, I think both the fund and the Kathmandu Covenant, the rhetoric around the fund doesn't really work. It's once again, coming together and asking for money. I think what we should be focused on is really about indigenous wealth creation and wealth sourcing from the region to fund activities, that are important for the region. So I think that's the difference, and that's why initiatives like this don't work very well, and they lose their visibility after the initial articulation.
You just talked about local wealth creation in order to fund important civil society projects. Could you give us an example or two of what's happening out there and what's working?
Right. I think once the US funding was gone, and that was clear, the language used among many INGOs was to pivot towards Europe and to look at money from Europe. So, applying for, EU calls or foreign ministry calls by respective governments, especially from Western Europe. But again, it's very competitive. So that was one wisdom. The second wisdom was to try to go to countries, and I here speak about Asia, to try to tap money from sort of rich capitals such as Japan, South Korea, Singapore, to see if this can be bridged. The opinion was that these are rich Asian countries and there would be money. Again, I speak very specifically around democracy and human rights, and it's not easy to come by money from these countries for this particular type of work. So I think that's the problem, and that's why it's not successful. I think what is important is to look at generating income, so having some kind of business in which you could, generate some profits and then funnel it in to your sort of not-for-profit work. I'm from Singapore, and when I speak to my contemporaries in Singapore, and share with them this issue of funding, they will always tell me the best way to fund Asia Center is to find a very, very small piece of real estate somewhere where you can sell donuts. And if you have large sale of donuts, that profit is the way to fund the Asia Center. It's a bit trivializing, but I think the model is there, how you generate income and so on. The other thing is also to maybe fundraise from individuals who are moderately comfortable. You don't really need to go to the rich folks, because the rich folks, in Asia, do not have a culture of giving to CSOs. People with ability and means, when they retire, they want to write their memoirs, they want to travel, they might self-fund themselves to a conference to speak. They take pride in writing a book and publishing it, but it's always about themselves. It's never about others or building an institution. So that's why I think it's better to go one or two pegs lower to friends, family, those who can give you a few dollars to support the work that you do. I think that kind of modest fundraising with modest spending, with passionate workers, can keep quite a few, not-for-profit activities, especially around democracy and human rights.
So let's drill in a little bit more deeply into work around democracy and human rights. It seems that with all the funding cuts that have happened globally, this particular subset of the development sector seems to be the hardest hit. Just wondering why that is the case, and when we compare it to projects that are not politically sensitive, such as healthcare and orphanages.
Yeah, because governments and the society from the region is not really keen. The body politic, ordinary citizens, with or without money, they are happy to give to orphanages, charities, old folks' home, the disabled, and so on. But once something is political, where let's say it's refugees or migrant workers or even civil and political rights, people hardly give because, it's not the way it is. That's why even for, politics and electoral politics, political parties, who are not in power but are contesting elections often will either have to be supported by the leaders from their own personal funds, or perhaps small funding from the general public. Yeah, so I think that's the kind of culture in terms of money for democracy and human rights. Governments do give money in the region, but they will give for non-political causes, such as health. They do give a fair bit for youth employment, to stimulate youth employment. So they're very big at SMEs, startups. Even environment, it's a little bit dodgy. It's kind of a give and take. So if you want to operate as a social enterprise, for example, you will probably take money from government, and it will be kind of around safe issues such as recycling, waste, and those kinds of things.
And that sort of brings us to talking about Asia Center more specifically. I know from my past encounters with you that Asia Center operates in the space of democracy and human rights. But for our listeners, could you please tell us about the primary mission or missions of Asia Center?
Essentially, Asia Center is positioned as a civil society research institute. We undertake work around democracy and human rights, and it's primarily driven by this ethos of research for good, research for political good. So the bulk of our work is around evidence-based research that touches on issues of democracy and human rights as championed by civil society. So that's broadly the mission. We began with a focus on Southeast Asia, but now we look at larger Asia.
Once again, return to this theme of a resource-constrained environment. What is Asia Center's strategy to survive and maybe even thrive in such an environment in order to carry out its mission?
Yeah, I've been working in this space both in intergovernmental and international NGOs for quite some years. I've also had a similar amount of time career-wise at tertiary institutions. So I bring the knowledge of working in both environments together. So for me, the thought process, about 12 years, 15 years ago, when I began thinking about setting up an independent civil society research institute, the first thing was to ensure it is on, stable and strong legs. So Asia Center operates across 4 offices now, 2 in Bangkok, 1 in Cambodia, and 1 in Malaysia. The first thing was to self-fund and buy the premises on which Asia Center operates. So that's our model. So Asia Center, through me, owns all our, infrastructure assets. As part of the startup, I also made, what I would call, impact funding to not only buy those properties, but also to ensure that the properties are renovated, the tables and chairs are bought, so to speak, and, initial TV, conference room facilities, laptops, and all of that. So the whole infrastructure is set up. So that's the base. So to some extent, Asia Center doesn't really have to pay rent to an external landlord. So then we are locked down. Then for all the offices, as we start up, the initial salary or 2 is also provided through this kind of, self-funded impact investment to the Asia Center offices until such time they find their legs in a year or 2 to look out for external funding. So we operate in such a way that we can survive with just project funding, because the core funding of the infrastructure to some extent is not really required. And we can also do more because we are not forced to work from home. We are not forced to work virtually. We actually have offices. We have a good footprint. We are a regional organization in the true sense of the word, in that we have multiple offices. We are not stationed in one country, in a geographical area, and then, claim that we are regional without really having true, regional footprint. So I think, that is the key difference in terms of, why Asia Center, kind of has an edge and also is able to navigate, funding crisis, but also operate kind of in a low funding environment.
So you talked about Asia Center getting its infrastructure paid for upfront. And so we go back to the metaphor of the donut stand. What sort of projects does Asia Center undertake? Is that a sort of a competitive bidding process, or Asia Center actually has expertise that makes it stand out in the field?
We are definitely known for our quality research, especially around civil society issues. We are a sought-out partner. For all projects, you do need external funding. So Asia Center, often partners with international NGOs, and we jointly bid for projects. Win some, lose some, mostly lose a lot, but we have a few hits. And in those kind of multi-year projects, we often, take up the Asia leg of the work and lead on the research. We also sometimes in these projects also are appointed at the regional convener because some of these multi-year projects, towards the end of the 2 or 3 year project cycle, there will be a regional meeting, which is something that Asia Center would host as an events manager, given that we are based in Bangkok, and Bangkok continues to be a sought after regional location. So that's in terms of bidding for projects. But there are also organizations that reach out to us directly and ask us to undertake research in particular areas in the region, whether it's about media, whether it's about women and human rights, or whether it's about faith-based issues, just to name a few. So in that regard, we are commissioned to undertake research work. Increasingly, another area of work that we do is around media. So we are often also approached to run campaigns on behalf of international organizations. So campaigns such as youth promotion around democracy and human rights. These can be 3 months, 6 months, 1 year campaigns. So they have a mixture of things. The building of digital content, podcasts, op-eds, and things like that. So these are the scheme of work that we undertake at Asia Center, and we've been doing this now nearly 12 years.
That kind of leads me to trying to find a connection between sort of newer sources of funding and what projects do you undertake. Do the middle powers either directly or indirectly fund research projects that you were talking about?
Not really, or in fact, the answer is no. I think first of all, many middle power don't have extra change to spare. If they do, they will either disperse the money internally or to their immediate neighborhood, to other smaller countries and partners, in order to have some influence. And if there's any research to be done, they will, farm it out to their own sort of national institutions as such. So they are not externally giving. For Asia Center, we are not looking really at the middle powers because they don't have much to give and they are not programmed that way. But where we look at, which is a bit different, is we engage with tech companies. So tech companies don't really fund research, but they do. They are interested in engaging Asia Center to provide training. Now, whether it's media literacy training or whether it's digital security training, why do they approach organizations such as Asia Center? Because we have our own constituency. So Asia Center has a good reach among civil society, youth around the region. So they come to us in order to tap us to reach out to our communities. Technology companies work with different partners. They're also interested in reaching out to SMEs, so they may then reach out to chambers of commerce as a collaborating partner, for example. But for us, it's about reaching out to our networks. So in the last few years, we've done partnership work with Amazon, AWS, Google, just to name a few.
Awesome. So let's zoom out again in this climate where it seems likely that the international funding architecture will continue to fragment. And it's also becoming increasingly obvious that the sector is not experiencing merely a temporary glitch. So looking ahead, how do you assess the evolving civil society landscape? You're a player in it. At the same time, you're also connected to other civil society organizations. What does the future look like for them in this new landscape?
I think the new landscape also include other rivalries. You see universities and academics are also vying for the CSO dollar. So you will have individual academic operators, wanting to collaborate with international organizations, embassies, and all of that. So they want to tap that money. You have for-profit enterprises. They position themselves as social enterprises, but they are for-profit, and they are also coming in to compete in the traditional space where CSOs were largely operating. So you have that very intense challenge. And the problem is also made bigger if you have project managers from INGOs who cannot see the difference. I always articulate to the project managers and INGOs, I said, if you support Asia Center and you fund Asia Center in a piece of work, you contribute to the strengthening of a civil society organization, you contribute to the learning of a new set of knowledge workers, young people who are coming to the civic space, and you give them jobs and give them opportunity because they will take the mantle and move on further. So I often, tell the INGO project managers to think through whether they would be better off, parting their money to individual consultant and individual operators, whether they come from the universities or one person, businesses or social enterprises. Those are decisions taken by, the respective project managers of our NGOs. There's nothing more we can say, but we can certainly point out the advantages, supporting organizations such as Asia Center or others who may have other speciality. We need to, and we do at Asia Center, articulate that difference. Moving forward, what I see in the civil society landscape is that we are going to see a reduction in the number of CSOs in the field. I think the smaller ones will have challenge, surviving or operating. The bigger ones, I think, will shed some fat, and then maybe the mid-sized ones will consolidate. So that's just in terms of the shape. The INGO's footprint in the sub-regions of the world, I think, would be very much reduced. We have first-hand knowledge from Asia. We can see it. Many of them have closed down their offices and have retreated. They are slowly trickling and coming back, but as visitors from the northern capitals, right? And they, are sussing out partners. Asia Center position itself as a regional organization, and we tell international partners we are one way through which you can access the region, especially if you are interested in critical research around democracy and human rights and capacity building programs. So I can see the rise of what I call the local brands. I think the international brands, pick one, an international NGO. They are what I call sunset brands, They will slowly fade out through a mixture of funding, internal issues, Time to time, it's not unusual. You will see a very, very old international NGO going through internal problems, leadership struggles and things like that, because their governance systems are relics of the past. They are not nimble. So I think we are seeing a sunset of the old legacy brands and the rise of the new brands. And, I see Asia Center as part of the rise of the new brands and with a new way of thinking around how we engage the issues in the region. So I think these are the transformative features of the new environment, partly, I think, shaped by funding, but more likely to be impacted by changes in technology.
James, thanks for a very enlightening discussion on CSOs and NGOs in Asia that are trying to survive in a resource-constrained landscape. I'm looking forward to our next conversation on Asia Center's Big Ideas.
Thank you.
That was Dr. James Gomez, Regional Director and Founder of Asia Center. This interview was recorded on the 28th of January 2026, and it's published under the Creative Commons license. Copyright Asia Center 2026. I'm Kelvin Param, and thanks for joining us.